Hello, my name's Seb, and it's interesting hearing all the talks over in Taiwan as well as here now, that the notion that the smart city is one that is heavily quantified and very much designed for speed and designed for ease of use. But perhaps museums and libraries are places where an alternative vision of a smart city might be glimpsed. One that isn't driven by speed and acceleration and isn't about a personalised journey or one that is quantifiable, but is one that is about exploring some other more human qualities. So as we know, our cities are now around the world defined by a loss of public space, and public space is transforming into a digital space. As I rode the train into Shanghai yesterday, the sense of public space was lost. The space of the train was interrupted by everybody watching their phones and playing the sound from their phones, which was very surprising to me, very loudly through their speakers. This is something that was very foreign to me. We've also become very familiar with the notion of surveillance. So this caused quite a shock in Europe and the UK when it first came out. This was in 2012, where the garbage bins in the city were taking people's MAC addresses from their phones, their network identifiers from their phones, and then tracking their movements past these bins, and was serving them customised advertising based on knowing it was them going past. And again, as I walked through the stations yesterday and walked through the West Bund in Shanghai, the ubiquitous presence of cameras means that this is no longer a surprise. This is accepted part of how we live in our cities. And this is generating a very quantifiable city, a city whose success is measured only numerically. The only things that matter in this sort of world are numerically measurable things, and we're seeing that this applied in the neoliberal West as a quantification of culture, quantification of the value of art, the value of literature, the value of film, the value of emotion as the quantifiable, measurable things. And again, when I was working in the United States, a lot of my work was looking initially at how Disneyland was set up when they were set up when they set up a project called My Magic Plus in 2008. This is really quite a vision of a smart city applied to a theme park, and you may know this from Disneyland in Shanghai too. The My Magic Plus was set up as a way of creating a database of all of the visitors, all of the users of Disneyland, and visitors from 2013 on were given a wristband that you wore throughout the park, and the wristband tracked where you were, which allowed them to deliver you personalised service within the theme park, as well as reduce labour costs. So they could deploy labour to the restaurants and the cafes just in time, because they could track the flows of visitors throughout that park, much as we heard about the measurement of traffic within the city here as a way of maximising the flows of people throughout that city, which sounds good, but it is also a very reductive and quantitative way of measuring happiness within a city. And Disneyland, quite ironically, talks about itself as the most happy place on earth, but it is also the most quantified place on earth. So within our societies now, we see apps and APIs, Bluetooth tracking, Wi-Fi tracking, and cell phone tracking as very commonplace and now normalised things. These were not normalised a decade ago. This is a very recent development. And artists such as this artist, Adam Harvey, a New York artist, has been very, very critical of the rollout of surveillance technologies within museums. So this is a project that he did in 2014, Big Data Pawn Shop, which was about revealing, making public the locations of the Bluetooth beacons within the Guggenheim Museum in New York as a way of allowing people who were visiting the museum to have agency about whether they wanted to be tracked and what their role as a participant in visiting the museum actually was. Now, I have done very similar things, so I am not exempt from this. When I was working in Sydney in 2010, I was one of the first people in the museum world to apply Wi-Fi tracking data to analysing how visitors moved throughout museums. This was a project on an exhibition, a fashion exhibition about lace, the design of lace. And it was very, very crude, but it was a way of us evaluating the way people moved through space. And this was using technology that was being widely used in shopping malls, in retail precincts, particularly in Dubai. So in 2010, this is nearly a decade old. Also, one of my favourite museums in Australia, Mona in Tasmania, also does very, very similar things. And in 2011, when you visited the museum, your phone was tracked. And when you left the sort of museum, you were sent a full map of where kind of you had been within the museum and the things that you saw and the things you liked. And this felt, in 2011, very novel and very exciting. But I would suggest that this is now quite kind of utopian. And this is not necessarily such a great thing. So if I go back in my career to the early 2000s, this is when the internet, the network society, still felt quite utopian and we felt quite good about it. We were starting to sense some negative things, but it was generally pretty good. So I was working at the Powerhouse Museum, a big museum of design and science and technology, and we were doing a lot of early digitisation of the things in our collection. So 3D digitisation, 2D digitisation, and nowadays museums are digitising their collections. This is part of standard museum practice nowadays. And anyone wanting to work in the museum sector or work with museums, digitisation of museums is now very much core of the things you must and should learn. And very early on, when we started to put these up onto the internet, this is in 2005, my teams built a very, at the time, sophisticated, now very primitive database for all access to all of the museum's collection. And we used early semantic web technologies, we used early text mining, and we revealed all of the data about the object. So this is a comb from the museums, from the Powerhouse Museum's collection. It's been very well catalogued, so the curators have written a lot of things about this comb. It's been well catalogued by the registrars, the staff who say what things are. And we also opened this up to what at the time was called social tagging. So the idea that we would allow the public to tell us anything about these works in our collection. which in 2005 was apparently radical. And one morning, someone had put a URL, a web address into the tag section of that comb. We did not know who this person was. It was an anonymous tag. And what was really nice about this was when I followed that link, and it wasn't spam, it actually went to another digitised collection held by another by the National Library of Australia. And that link was to, in fact, the newspaper art record about the museum acquiring the comb in the 1950s. So this sort of beginnings of connected up collections began to form as quite an exciting thing, and this sort of notion of a global network of all of the things in all of the museums around the world became part of a dream that many of us shared, and this is where I met Ilya the first time in 2008. And now of course, we know that there are big companies doing this, and this is now also quite a standard practice. So my team's also in 2008, we were one of the first, but not the first, to make downloadable data from our collection and a public API for our collection in 2008. And this was very exciting. It led to some other projects. This was a government civic project that was about creating a semantic browser for all of the collections in the state of New South Wales. This ran for about three years and was an experimental project. This interestingly also connected up with population data and census kind of data, and this is where there was a lot of starting to see the connections between the data held in museums and the data held by cities and by governments, and how you might connect civic data up with cultural data. The data collected by cities and applied, the quantifiable citizen, the eyes of the state, and the eyes from the citizens coming from culture. Around this time too, there was, of course, the beginnings of the smartphone. So very early work with QR codes in my teams as well. This is the very old phones that we used to use. They seem very, very primitive now. And really the idea that I was exploring, along with many others around the world in the museum technology community, was beginning to be how might we connect the museum, the confines of the museum, to the world, the rest of the world. How could we liberate collections from the storehouses and put them back in kind of to where they came kind of from, a kind of digital repatriation. So we did experiments with augmented reality. So this is 2009, where we took our photographic collection from the museum that was photographs of the world and put them back in to the places where they came from. Again, very early, and this now seems very, very old and very trivial, because you can now do this in a 2-hour hackathon. This is not hard to do at all. But we also started to experiment with what happened when you did this without using someone's phone, when you actually created paper devices. So those old things we used to carry around called maps. Maps are actually very, very good, and what is nice about maps is they have a usability that perhaps our other devices don't necessarily have. So anyway, so we started to, my teams and many others in the sector began to think of museums as inherently democratic spaces for the people. And that also museums could, if they worked well, very effectively, that museums were also curiosity machines. Museums were there to create a greater curiosity, rather than to answer questions like a search kind of a tool does. That museums were supposed to ask kind of you things to make you more curious about the world, and make kind of you problematize the things we take for granted. So in 2011, I then moved to New York in the United States to work with the Smithsonian. So this was working with the Design Museum, the National Museum of Design in the United States. And this museum is in the middle of Manhattan. And you can see down on the bottom right-hand side the Guggenheim, the very famous museum, again with the Bluetooth beacons at that time. The Cooper Hewitt was 2 blocks north of the Guggenheim. And just as I left, and this will become apparent a little later in the talk, Australian coffee became available between those 2 sites. That was very, very important to me. And I came to New York mostly to renovate this museum, which was a very historic museum with a very large collection, but a pre-digital collection, a museum that hadn't digitized its collection very much at all, and was in a building that wasn't designed as a public space. It was designed as a private home. But we began to think of the museum itself, the physical building of the museum, as an interface. So the museum physically is an interface, and the museum digitally has interfaces. And the museum becomes a social interface to an archive that is held both digitally and physically now. And in terms of rebuilding the museum, this very traditional museum, the idea was to think of what is an internet-first museum for historic materials. So if we did digitized all of the things in the museum and put them on the web and made each of them addressable, how might visitors use the building differently? Because it was no longer about seeing things you couldn't see anywhere else, because everything would be digitized. But it was about experiencing them, because the reason to physically go to the museum wasn't to look, but to experience with all of your senses. So this was the problem or the challenge that we faced as designers. That even though everything in the museum would be available for free on the internet, how might we assert that it was still important to physically come to the museum? How would you make that experience a different experience? So we made a thing. We made a magic wand, like a wand like this, which was really a little bit like using a library card or perhaps a transit card, except we didn't make it a card. And this was the idea of the museum itself becoming a technological space that began to connect the things within the building to the things beyond the building and your life beyond the building. So this was about creating a portable NFC reader and creating creating museum labels with NFC built into them, and pairing that reader with your ticket. And in the design research that we were doing around this project, these are some of the challenges that we faced. How do you create desirability? How kind of do you manufacture these? How do you answer the question for visitors, am I using this the right way? So we worked with GE, the big American design and manufacturing behemoth, and they helped us design a physical product. We did 3D printing to create prototypes, and we made this device. We made this pen. And the full story of the pen, I've written a very long paper with my colleague Aaron de Cope about that, which is on this URL, which is a very honest teardown of the challenges of making this device, because we actually, as a museum, went into a space where the museum was manufacturing technology. And this is a short video of the pen. So the pen, idea and the interaction design for the experiences of the pen was done with a New York-based firm called Local Projects. So when you come into the museum, you're given the pen, and as you walk around the building, you can touch the labels within the building to save all of those pieces. You can bring them back to these big interactive tables. You can do 3D design yourself on those tables, and then save all of that. So all of the things that you see in the building and all of the things that you make in the building are saved, that you can get access to at home or at school or at university or at your design studio. Now, in the design of this was about the interfaces on these screen, focusing on browsing, not searching. This wasn't about trying to expect visitors to know the things they were seeking, but to create playful and what are called generous interfaces. The interfaces that allow other things to happen was very important in the design of this. And of course it was built on an API. We built the APIs for this, and those were public. These were about making those APIs ones that other people could, they were hackable. This was like the hackable city. This became the hackable museum. This became a setup where people could build their own experiences on the kind of top of ours. And of course, because we were very aware of the challenges of surveillance, was that you could do this anonymously. You could visit the museum without telling the museum who kind of you were. There was no identity cards. You could pay with cash. You didn't need to supply an email address or a telephone. You were lent the pen. You could use the pen, and when kind of you left the building, you could log in anonymously to the website with kind of your ticket and download all of the things that you had, and importantly, delete your own record from the database if kind of you wanted to. Now, of course, the design of this wasn't about designing the pen or even about designing the APIs or the interaction design of the screens. It was about experience design and training the people who worked with visitors to enable this to work really well. And it was also about creating a system that wasn't seamless. It was about creating ruptures, these seams that made people ask questions of each other and revealed the holes in the data, the holes and the gaps in the museum's collection, and made visitors question what things should be in a national museum, because it was their museum as well. And the challenge in doing this, in terms of an experience design challenge, is that it never finishes. You deliver the product and the customers start using the product, but the customers use the product in ways you didn't expect. So when someone designs a phone with a speaker in the phone, they don't expect a train full of a carriage of 50 people to all have their speaker running in the train at once. They don't design it as a system. So the first day that the pen launched, when the museum reopened, there were all these problems, and my team had to come in and work around these problems and challenges to create customer service, user experience design to make that better. And we needed to do this very intensely, and we needed to work with visitors, because visitors are the humans within the city, or in this case, the museum. The humans are not always predictable, and that's what makes humans kind of great. Is we're not always predictable, and this meant that a lot of my work from 2011 on has been about service kind of design for institutions, not exhibitions by by themselves. So 2015, I moved to another city. I now live in Melbourne, and Melbourne is a very well-connected, smart kind of city. It's very digital city. In Melbourne, there's open kind of data even for the trees. Every single tree in Melbourne, you can send an email to, and the tree will email you back. And what is interesting about this is that people started writing poems to trees, and the city government officials would need to create messages back from the trees to create conversations. So this was a human-plant relationship. Very cool. There's lots of stories about this, but it's a beautiful project. But this is also very important for city planning, because the trees are what makes parks and the city a livable space. And when you can also download a full three-dimensional city model, is also critical, because it allows planning and building to be better done. And even the trams in Melbourne, and now this is an art project using AR. So you hold up your phone to the trams, and the trams play music using computer vision as they go past. So it's a very playful use of public transport. So I am now at this museum, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, which is the National Museum of Film, Television, Video Games. Museum of Video Games. This is very strange, right? Digital culture and art. And this is right in the centre of Melbourne. So this is right near the railway station, and there's lots of fantastic coffee all around. And why I think coffee is important is because when I was in Shanghai yesterday, we get a lot of Chinese kind of tourists to Melbourne each year, and lots of Chinese students in Melbourne. But when I was in Shanghai yesterday, I saw this, Melbourne lifestyle coffee. It's a thing, right? So like coffee in Melbourne, like even you guys know it. It's like crazy. Anyway. So a very big museum now, 1.5 million visitors a year. And this is from what we have as our government report, the annual report, which is a very quantitative view of the museum. This is what the government thinks success is. But for us, it isn't really about these figures. It's about what do people learn about film, television, video games? What is their critical literacies that are developed? And these are very hard to kind of measure. So we make exhibitions. So this is an exhibit of video game designers that's been touring around the world for about 7 years. It was in Taipei, it was in Seoul, and now it's in North America. This exhibition with DreamWorks, the animation studio, was also touring in Asia and is now in Europe. We also do VR exhibitions. This is Lynette Walworth's work, Collisions. We also commission video. This is a virtual reality dance commission that we did in 2015, working with Sydney Dance Company, where the visitors themselves became the spectacle of the work. And lots of other commissions. Daniel Crooks, Zanny Begg, Soda Jerk, a lot of Australian media artists doing pretty exciting things. And also, because this museum dates back to about 2001, we also have a lot of other works from Australian media artists. We have Philip kind of Brophy. We have Stellark's archive. We also have some of kind of Julian Oliver's very early work too. And we have a large collection of film and media and other things from Australia. Some historic media from the state film archive showing life in Australia. We also run a co-working space and accelerator. So with my teams and with our staff, we have an accelerator that is about putting technologists who are running companies alongside artists and museum staff. So we have 60 desk space sitting alongside our staff. But at the end of the day, when we are designing experiences for our visitors in our exhibits, we are aware that the currency of our museum is really about time, because we are a museum of time-based media, and so it is about the time people have to watch, to play and experience. And so for my teams and for my museum, we think about valuing the time that visitors, that people, citizens, give us when they visit, and try to multiply the return on that gift that visitors give us of time. And we use each new exhibition to pilot and test new approaches to design and visitor experience, be that through observing the way that visitors use phones within the building, whether that's through journey mapping and these design methods that allow us to reveal problems and challenges with our building and our services and the way humans move kind of through our space, or with big exhibitions. This is our latest big touring exhibition that has just finished in Melbourne, and next we'll tour to Singapore and then move on to Europe. This was looking at Lewis Carroll, the stories of Lewis Carroll in film. And in television. So these very famous images, this is a big video installation, lots of sets and the objects from these films and other things. Also big projection mapping experiences, these kinds of things that bring worlds to life, this immersive environment. But for me, and in terms of where this ties back to the start of the talk, it was around this. So we designed this map, so this paper map with NFC in it that each visitor would get and carry around their exhibition visit. And that would work as a map that you could use to study as you moved through the galleries, and it was a fictional map. It was a piece of narrative writing. But the map also came to life and was magical in particular moments. So this is using the NFC part of the map, that the map becomes a magic kind of device that starts to tell and reveal other stories throughout your working through that. And of course, because it is a digital experience, it leaves a data kind of trail. So this data trail, again, it creates this quantified museum experience, which doesn't tell us about the curiosity that the exhibition created for people. So we're also just doing a big rebuilding project, so we're rebuilding the museum. And the reason we are rebuilding, one of the reasons we are rebuilding the museum now, is because whilst I said we were the museum of film, TV, video games, that really means we are the museum of everything on your smartphone. And so why come to the museum if everything that you can see in the museum is on your phone anyway? So we've started to really focus on the institution, the repurposing of the institution to focus on the connections between the things in the museum and what's on your phone, rather than just access to the things themselves. And I think that points to a different sort of relationship for the museum and its community. So most of my work, and this is coming to an end now, this talk is coming to an end, is about working on technological change, organisational and structural change, and cultural change, the way curators work, the way educators work, the way visitors and the museum work together. But I'll just finish with this quote from a professor from New York University that really begins to ask, well, what about the things that we don't save? What about the bits of cultural memory that don't get catalogued and stored and saved on servers or library shelves? What about performative knowledge, ritual, dance, cooking, sports, data, shadows, wind and rust? These are the things that are not quantifiable. Thank you. 谢谢。